Good morning. Yes, I am still Alison Druin.
Hi, I'm Joe Fishkay. We're going to switch one day and see if any of you notice, I think. No.
Yeah, but I can't do that really lovely accent he has. Anyway, thank you all for being here at 8:30 in the morning with so much energy and excitement. We have an amazing two people here for us to share time with for the next hour or a little less. Again, we will be thinking about Chi for Good, but in a different way today. We're going to be thinking about what does it mean to mix industry and academic ideas to change the world in so many ways. What does it mean to really be in industry? Or what does it really mean to be in academia? Maybe it's all mixed up because it's all about those great ideas and the great energy we can use to make change in so many different ways.
So, to talk about that, we have two wonderful people here today. Marissa Mayer is the CEO of Yahoo. Before that, she spent some time at Google. She's worked at other places. One of the places I wanted to mention was that she had an internship in Zurich, working with Matthew Chalmers, who a lot of you will know from Glasgow. So she understands something about our community. She's got a degree in Symbolic Systems from Stanford. Terry has been teaching at Stanford for a long time. I've taught a couple of classes there with him. A lot of us have taken classes from him. He's been a leader. One of the things that impresses me about Terry is his ability to be a leader in multiple fields. He did great work in artificial intelligence. He did great work in HCI. Recently, he's done fabulous work in HCI for D work and developmental stuff. And he is a mentor and a friend to many, and a great person. So, without any further ado, oh wait, questions. Once again, we will be using slido.com, www.slido.com. Enter the code CHI2016. You can ask questions. You can vote other people's questions up. It's a great way to participate and a great way to make sure that we can get to the questions that you as an audience all care about. Without any further ado, please let me introduce Marissa and Terry. Hi, Al.
May the force be with you.
All right, am I on? Yes. So, just to put some context here, I think they asked me to do the interview partly because I've known Marissa probably as long as most people here. I knew her when she was an undergraduate at Stanford and got to know her a little bit. She actually worked more closely with my friend Eric Roberts, who was in the teaching program there. And then I was involved with the Google guys, and for a year in the early part of the century, as we can now say, I was on sabbatical at Google, and I was working with the design team. So I got to go to the weekly design team meetings, which Marissa really was the main person and spark plug and idea generator in. And so I got to see her at work in a real setting of trying to make things happen. We worked on Gmail, at the time it was called Caribou, and a bunch of projects that are today you see all the time. So my contact with her is in the design area, and I think that's one of the reasons they wanted me to be the interviewer. I'm not a business person. I don't know about corporate stuff. So I'm not going to ask about corporate stuff. But really, because this is Chi conference and we're interested in human-computer interaction design, to really focus on that aspect of it. So, good to see you again.
It's great to be here.
So, I guess, let me ask a very broad question, and we'll go from there, which is, when I was working with you there more directly, the focus really was on design in a very specific context of products that we were developing and things we're doing. Now you have a very different level of responsibility in terms of thinking not just of what is the design, but how does it fit in with the strategy, with the larger picture. And I'm just curious your sense and your reactions to where are there places where those get into tension with each other, where you might, from a design point of view, think that something is a better thing to do, but from a strategy or a corporate point of view, think that it's different. And how often does that kind of tension come up for you?
Sure. Well, I think that the one observation I had a few months into my role at Yahoo is that I realized that it's all a design problem. Right, it's a design problem on so many different levels, because there's the design of the products, but then there's also the design of the corporation. There's the design of how we govern, how we come up with the strategy. And it's actually one of the most rich and interesting design problems I've ever worked on, because you always have constraints, you have specifications, there's constraints that you need to meet. And overall, it's been just a fascinating project to work on. And I find that a lot of the things that you learn when you're doing design and in designing an interface is the same type of design questions you have to ask yourself when you're doing these bigger design, handling these bigger design challenges as well. And so I think sometimes I would reflect that sometimes there's a challenge overall in terms of the strategy. I think that when I think back to, for example, some of the things we did on Gmail, I think that there's good analogies there where there's times when you'll want to have your users come to appreciate a certain feature in the product. I remember with Gmail, one of the things we really wanted was we wanted search to be very important, right? It makes sense. It was Google's version of email. Search needed to be very important. Problem is, search really gets valuable when you have a lot of something. So we wanted people to have a lot of email, which meant we wanted them to stop deleting their email. And I remember it was at the time almost, now it's become almost funny, but we didn't have a delete button on the Gmail interface, and that wasn't because users didn't want it. They did want it, but we also wanted people to spend less time deleting their email, because we felt that that wasn't a good use of time overall. And two, we wanted them to appreciate how good the search was in the product and that it made it easier to pull things up. And so I find that most commonly I see tension like that in terms of both strategy and design, where you'll be looking at a particular element of a design, want to meet an end user need or an end user request, like, can I have a delete button on my email? And then you'll say, well, wait, maybe if we don't have that feature, or if we make it a little bit less convenient to sort of have that knee-jerk response of deleting the email, we actually might be able to awaken a new pattern of how users work and say, okay, look, let's spend less time deleting your email, spend more time searching it. And the search will be precise and pull things up. I think that is kind of illustrative of the types of tension I feel more often. It's less about strategy getting in the way of the end user, because I actually find that usually the best strategy actually supports what the end user wants, right? All of our businesses get stronger when users are happier. That's just a fact. And so when you've got the right strategy, it usually supports that. I find usually, if anything, it's more that when there's some element of the product you want people to really appreciate, and you want to try and have them adopt a new behavior to really get a full feel for it, that's really where there's kind of the most design tension in between design and strategy.
So let me follow up on that a minute, because I was involved many years ago in a piece of software called the Coordinator, which people referred to as missionary software. And it had that feel, which is, we don't want you to just use the software, we want you to learn a different way of working through using the software. Do you think that's something that you can do successfully? Give people not what they think they want, but what you think, once they understand it, they will want.
Yeah, I think you can, but I think you also have to be pragmatic about it. I mean, it wasn't an accident that we shipped Gmail without a delete button, but we added it. In fact, we actually meant to add it earlier than we did. We actually kind of forgot for a while, and then introduced it later. But I think that, because what you want to do is you don't want to force people, in my view, to work a way that they aren't comfortable working. You want to encourage them, but also, that's why I said sometimes it's easier to take those functionalities, put them a little bit further away, so they're not just the knee-jerk response of the go-to action. But they're still there, and then maybe over time they become more prominent. For those, by that point, the users who are going to develop the new way of working, or the new way of thinking, the new way of searching their email, et cetera, they'll also, the people who will evolve and adopt that new practice will have, and those who won't ultimately are being inconvenienced by the fact that it's further away, and that's why you have to iterate.
Interesting. Let me go a little deeper on what you said about design problems in organizations, because when I think about interaction design, there's a kind of methodology which has to do with user observation, user interviews, and then you go to a stage of coming up with brainstorming ideas, and we teach a whole process about that. Do you feel that at that larger level it's a similar process, or it's just a similar goal?
I think, it can be a very similar process. I'll give 2 examples, PB&J and our board slides. So when I got to Yahoo, there were lots of things that people came and complained to me about. And they would say, look, we don't understand, why do we have to go through a 1-hour orientation to be able to use our badge to get into the gym? Right? Why can't we get new laptops that have more stronger CPUs if we're a programmer? Questions like this, and people ask me lots and lots of questions. And someone made this comment to me. They said, I don't even know where you're going to start. There's thousands of things that need to be fixed, and that's really overwhelming. And then we thought about it, and we said, okay, why don't we harness the power of the crowd and the wisdom of the crowd to help figure out what these problems are and also prioritize them? And so we used a moderator tool. And we called it PB&J, Process, Bureaucracy, and Jams. And you could basically go on PB&J and basically state a problem, something that you wanted fixed or changed, and vote it up or down. And we basically took anything that had more than 25 votes and took a good look at it. We took anything that more than 50, and we really made a strong commitment to resolve it. And if it had more than 100, we really did our best to actually just take the suggestion and make it happen, usually within a day or a week. And actually in the first year of that, and then the other thing was we actually had people, because they were citing the things that they wanted changed, they were also really enrolled in helping be part of the solution. They would record their name, we'd go back to them and say, well, how would you solve this? What would you recommend we do? And what we saw happen there was we actually got 1,000 different bugs out of the system inside of a year. So it really went through the same design process of brainstorming, prioritizing, designing solutions with the end users and the people who were being affected by the problems, and ultimately really getting them fixed. And so, I think that really helped us remove a lot of things that were kind of jamming up the system. And then similarly, for our board slides, one of the things that was really important to me was making our board, the decisions and the discussions that we have, more transparent to the company, so people understood why we were making the decisions that we were making, et cetera. And so I made a point of always showing our board slides after the fact to the company, so people would get an insight into what the board meeting had been like, what we had talked about, the decisions that had been made. And then someone had the good idea. They said, it's really not just the case that we want to know what's happening there. We actually want to influence it. And I thought, that makes perfect sense. So we came up with a system, again, using a moderator tool, where we'd have the employees write the board slides. So they could actually say, we had a highlights moderator and a lowlights moderator. People could put their different highlights and lowlights since the last board meeting on it, vote them up or down. And I said, look, I will go in and, I reserve the right to deduplicate, because I didn't want to have to say the same thing multiple times, but a moderator actually does a pretty good job of handling that anyway. But I would basically go in and present things in the order that they were voted on, both highlights and lowlights. If I had a different opinion, I would tell the board I had a different opinion, but I would present it as the company wrote it. And it was really terrific, because I think the board felt like they got to insight into directly how the company was working, feeling, thinking about different things. And it wasn't even intentional, but I think one of the great things was there was a transparency back, because ultimately it was all kinds of different viewpoints making their way into our boardroom, as opposed to just one set of viewpoints, or just my viewpoint, or just the management's viewpoint. Having edited what's a highlight, what's a low light, getting to hear from thousands of people in the company in terms of what they want the board to hear about, and what they want the board to know that they felt great about, and what they want to know let the board know that they didn't feel good about, in terms of what was going well in our products and our strategies and our execution. I think that all of that was really very positive. But again, so it's one, you have to design a process that allows it, but two, I thought it was really interesting that we actually enrolled the company in helping us design the actual content of what we do at board meetings. So I think PB&J and the board slides are 2 good examples of design process and work in terms of actual corporate culture and how we operate, but two, really trying to get some level of design input into the actual content in terms of what types of solutions we deploy or what types of discussions we have with the board.
So let me move that to a different domain, which is this is Chi for good. And one of the things which I think a lot of us are feeling in today's world is that if we could do some good for the political process, that would be a very good good. That it's really broken and needs a lot of fixing. And there are solutions which have some of the character of what you're talking about, but a very different population. So instead of the people who are working together at a company, you've got the huge diversity of people who are getting onto Twitter or getting onto whatever the system is. Do you see ways that those could be applied appropriately or in ways to really help with the political situation?
I'm not sure I have any good answers here, but I will say that I think that I've seen the wisdom of crowds work at a much larger scale than I would have thought. 10,000 people, letting 10,000 people collaborate on a slide together and collaborate on what problems get solved, I think has been really heartening for me. And I do think there's interesting tools like moderators to ultimately remove duplication and let people really get their agendas and their points aligned. Moderator tools naturally do that. I think that there are some really good opportunities here, but I also can see that one of the things that happens is because of social media and just the media in general, you definitely see an amplification of certain views, that where things that really are very nuanced ultimately really become caricatures. And I think, and I don't know how you actually solve that problem, that when something gets broadcast on a huge medium or has virality to it, how it doesn't become so one-dimensional that you lose so much of the nuance.
All right, let me go back to HCI design in a more traditional sense. In a company like Yahoo, you have a whole lot of different products which have come in different ways. Some are built in-house, some you bought, some came and so on. And I'm sure among those, there are some which you feel, okay, this is really good user design, more so than just the other ones that have come in. Which are the ones you're proudest of?
Well, that's like I was asking someone to pick like their favorite child. But I think that we've done so much work, and I think that the design team at Yahoo has been just terrific and tremendous to work with. And I really value everything they've done in terms of, there's a real emotion and personality, I think, to Yahoo, to the brand, to our products, and I love the way that the designers really bring that to life. And so I'm very excited about that. But obviously the 2 Apple Design Awards we won for Best Designed App of the Year, both Weather and News Digest, were 2 designs that we were really, really proud of. But we recently just rolled out a new design for our homepage, new design for our Yahoo app, Yahoo Mail. I would say that I'm really proud of the design work that I've been, I wish I could say that I helped with, but at this point I just largely get to observe. And so, I think that the design work that the Yahoo team has done over the past few years, both to reinvent the existing products like the homepage and mail and weather, but also some of the work that we've brought in like Tumblr, I think there's just some really interesting ideas there and some really, really beautiful design principles at play. And so I've been really proud of that work. I think that usually if I have a cringe moment at a Yahoo project, it's usually one where every now and then, just because the company is now 21 years old, every now and then you'll find an interface that just hasn't been touched since like 2000 or 2001. And you kind of forget what good web design looked like in 2000 or 2001, which doesn't look at all good today. And so every now and then I find some of those old relics sitting around, and I think that those are sort of the ones that I feel like we still got more to do on. But I've been really happy with what the team has done, and also less about the specific products, which I think are very good in and of themselves in terms of design, but more that there is a spirit now that our products that we're focusing on, news, sports, finance, lifestyles, the mail, search, Tumblr, that they need to be iterating all the time, and we need to be shipping new features all the time and changing the interface on nearly a daily basis. And the fact that the design team has really embraced that rate of change and that rate of development for our most important products, I think is something that I'm really proud of, because it does allow for a level of testing, of pragmatism, of experimentation, and also just even expressing using, sort of fun, whimsy, or that unique Yahoo voice, I think it's really been enabled by that much faster turn.
So you mentioned experimentation, and I know there was a tension, certainly back in the design groups at Google, between intuition by designers, people who said, I have a feel for this having been in the profession, and here's something that would work well, versus very specific A/B testing where you say, this one gets so many percent more. What do you feel is the right balance, or is that something you'd worry about?
Well, when I first got to Google, I'll just say I was a computer scientist. My background was AI. We tried very hard to hire an engineer to work on human-computer interaction. And would have systems work to do the other day. So our idea was to hire a human-computer interaction engineer who would work on systems, 2 or 3 days a week, and do the interface design the other half of the week. And of course, it was a 20-person company, so that might sound like not enough emphasis on design, which I agree with. It was, in the overall early days, but we failed to find that person. And so then at one point, Urs Hotzley called me into his office. He was then the VP of engineering, and he said, we can't seem to find a good UI engineer. You have this thing called Symbolic Systems in your background. Will you do this 1 day a week? And I said, okay, well, but I'm working on these AI algorithms. I don't want this to take away from that. And he was like, no, just do it 1 day a week. And then I remember as I walked out of the office, he suddenly said, oh, Marissa, one more thing. And I said, okay. And he said, what we don't need here is more opinions. We need data. And I definitely think there were times at Google, and there's been times in my career where I've taken that too literally. And we've been too reliant on data and not enough on opinions and intuition. And I do think it's a balance. I mean, I'm a very mathematical person, and I love the fact that with the internet and with the size of user bases that both Google and Yahoo enjoy of a billion users a month or more, you can do all kinds of sophisticated experimentation. And there's times when you can say, wow, can I actually mathematically prove that this design makes people happier with the product than that design? And there's definitely times, and there's definitely a time and a place for that. But I also think that there's a lot of room for intuition too. And as I said, I think that as interaction design evolves as a medium with mobile and desktop, and it becomes a more mature science, I think that it's less about finding sort of the fundamental mathematical truths of design, and it becomes more about intuition. And I think when you look at, for example, some of the best app designers I get to work with today, they're very driven by intuition, because it's a little bit less black and white than just an HTML page done this way and an HTML page done that way. Because apps, by definition, are so much more interactive, and now web pages have become so much more interactive. There's so many permutations that you have to trust your intuition as part of that process to really get to the best design.
You mentioned that you studied AI, and of course back then, it's not that long ago, but it was quite a bit different in that era about what people's expectations were and how it was being integrated into the world. What do you see as the centrality of AI to moving forward to what Yahoo does, or to what the field in general does?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when I look today, I mean, machine learning, it was clear to me back when I was at Stanford that machine learning was just going to have just a huge potential and opportunity, because my master's was right during kind of the end of what you might call the winter of AI. But I think that you started looking at like Bayesian logic and reasoning under uncertainty, and some of the machine learning and genetic programming and things like that were starting to take root, and it was really clear how applicable they are. But it really hadn't hit me how applicable they were until we started cataloging our systems at Yahoo, and literally every system has almost some part of it that is machine learned. Be it the ranking of search results, which obviously uses reinforcement learning and machine learning to a huge degree. Our forecasts for our traffic and our forecasts for our revenue are all done through machine learning, looking back at patterns, looking forward at patterns, understanding how to integrate things like holidays and weather. Our auction systems for our advertising are actually machine learned and reinforcement driven, actually figuring out how to rank ads and or target ads the right way based on the right information to give the most pleasing experience to both the user and the advertiser can be hugely helped by AI. And so it's interesting because I see the applicable elements of AI literally in almost every system that we have. And the systems where we don't have it, they're figuring out how to add it. And so I think that we're going to quickly approach a system where a product won't seem smart enough or well designed enough if it doesn't have some element intelligence and reinforced learning of some form in it. And I also think that over time, we're going to end up in a world where the computers that we work with and the ways we interact with them are just going to be a lot more intelligent. I think we're all very excited about conversational assistants. When I look at search, I've loved search. I've loved search since I was a grad student. I've lived it my whole career. And I do think that search is really exciting. But when I think about, I've got 3 small children. When I think about what will they ask me when they're teenagers, and if they ask me anything, people tell me don't get your hopes up. But assuming my teenagers,
can I go out tonight?
assuming my teenagers ask me about search, I think that search is incredible. But at the same time, with the dawn of mobile phones, it hasn't evolved nearly enough. The fact that we basically got devices that know how fast we're moving, know where we are, understand our preferences and our likes and what we do all day, and we actually haven't changed the format at all from the web. We've just essentially shrunken it down, and now we run it on a really small browser on the phone, is really something that is ripe for innovation. So I think that when we start talking about, can we start evolving towards a more general intelligence, conversational assistance, things like that, I think are very real, and we'll have those sooner rather than later.
So let me go in a different direction, which is, I know when you were at Stanford, you were involved in the teaching program, teaching undergraduates, teaching other undergraduates computing, and you were teaching the teaching of that. And I know at Google you were very involved with the APM program and getting the young program managers to integrate in. So the question is really, over these years and these various experiences, what are your insights that you've learned about the best way to bring young people up and bring them into the potential for higher positions and more?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that I've learned, because I was like the teaching, just to give a little bit of background, the teaching program at Stanford took undergraduates and turned them into section leaders. So you would immediately take the class, and about a year later you become a section leader, leading a group of 8 people, grading their assignments, teaching a weekly section, and then I moved from section leader to teaching assistant to ultimately lecturing the classes. And then at Google and now at Yahoo, we have something called the Associate Product Manager Program, where we take new college grads right out of school and put them in a 2-year program to be product managers. They do 1 year on one product, then they move to another product for their 2nd year, and then they graduate. So it works much like an associate program would at like a consulting firm or an investment bank. So you rotate and then you graduate. And so for background in both, I think in both cases, it was important to not linger in that learning and training phase too long. I think that one of the things that really helped at Stanford was the fact that you just finished taking the class yourself and suddenly you turned around to teach it. And the way that actually cemented your own understanding of the materials to have to turn around and explain it to someone else really, I think, overall, definitely improved my skills as a computer scientist, because once you start writing your programs and just overall coding much more clearly when you have to explain your code or explain how you think about your code to other people, especially in a teaching sense. And for the product management program, I wish I could say it was a grand design, but the simple truth is the Associate Product Manager program, when we came up with it at Google, was because we just couldn't hire enough product managers fast enough. I had a new boss, Jonathan Rosenberg. He and I worked for Jonathan for 9 years. He and I are good friends. But when he first got to Yahoo, he had been there for, I think it was about 4 months, and he had managed to hire 2 product managers during that time. So there had been
Google, you mean?
Sorry, at Google. There were 3 of us, and he managed to hire 2 product managers. And at the same time, Wayne Rosing, the head of engineering, had hired like 8 engineers a week. And so, we were running product management at like a 1:64 ratio, and we just couldn't keep up with how quickly engineering was hiring. So he said, how can we get a lot more product managers fast? And I had a bet with Jonathan, and I said, look, I bet I can grow new product managers faster than you can hire experienced ones. And he said, okay, well, how are you going to do it? And I said, well, I'm going to hire new grads that have a really good sense of how to apply technology, and we'll just see what happens. We're just going to throw them into the deep end. Because there was I'd obviously gone to Google right after graduating. There was another person there, Salar Kamangar, who now is doing some VC work. for Google and previously ran YouTube. And we showed up at Google as like 23, 24 years old, and we're given way too much responsibility. And it was just sink or swim. And I joked that Larry and Sergey just yelled at us until we became the people that they needed us to become. And I said, I want the APM program to be that, with hopefully a little bit less yelling. Because there was a lot of yelling at me, and me in particular, to ultimately get things where we needed them to be. But I think that what we've done with the APM program is, take someone, put them on a full product where they may be the sole PM of a really big product coming right out of school, and giving them a lot of responsibility and having them learn on the job, how to work with a team, how to work with design, how to work with all the different elements of the organization, and giving them a lot of feedback and giving them a lot of mentorship and guidance, but at the same time, really very, very hands-on learning. I think that's the two things those programs have in common, is moving very quickly from being the student to being the practitioner. And so I think that that's a key element, is that you want to be prepared, but you don't want to spend so long preparing that you forget about all the practical stuff. And so actually getting someone in the role so they understand, okay, this is, it's not just what people are saying, it's what I'm actually doing.
So one of the questions that always comes up in training is when you look at minorities or women, they don't have the previous experience of confidence that makes it easy for them to jump in and do things. What do you see as the way to encourage and to bring more of that forward?
Yeah, I think that when I have looked at that, I think that it's a hard problem, and it's not clear that it's getting solved nearly fast enough. But I always have had a hard time relating to the problem, and I think that part of it gives me an insight, which is I'm a very shy person. But at Google and at Yahoo, I'm not shy at all. And I was like, wait, I never have to think, wait, do I want to offer my opinion or wait to be called on? When I was a student, I would always wait to be called on. I was always that student. I'd have an answer. I'd have something I wanted to add. I was actually criticized repeatedly in discussion sections at Stanford for not participating enough because I just was so shy. But I realized at Google and at Yahoo, I don't have that feeling at all. And it's because I'm really comfortable. I think that I'm surrounded by environments of people who are very like-minded, who care a lot about the impact of what we're doing, the scale of what we're doing. They're excited about what technology could do or how technology might evolve to make this problem easier or harder. And I often say that passion is a gender-neutralizing force. And it's also, in terms of, it's an introvert neutralizing force as well, because if you're really passionate about something, you're with a lot of people who are also passionate about the same things, it's not nearly as scary to participate. And so I think that, one of the key insights is trying to help women, minorities, find their passion and be really inspired by it and not be afraid to voice it. And I think that in particular, I always say, for women, boys will always say, oh, yes, of course, I love programming and I love, video games, and there's all that kind of ilk. And I know that there's definitely women who will say, well, gosh, am I going to give up my femininity, or am I going to be a different person if I turn into a coder? And I've just said, look, in engineering, has all different applicability. I've often talked about the fact that I've never met a male engineer who didn't want to build a suspension bridge at the same time. But if you look at the principles in a suspension bridge, they're not that different than a dress. It's all about tensile strength. It's all about how you ultimately lay things out. And so, to me, there's different elements of people's passion that can come out in any different way. And I think that engineering is really inspiring, and there's lots of ways to apply your passion. And I think tapping into that passion and making people not afraid to is ultimately what can help give them a bigger voice.
So the passion is a neutralizing factor, which I think is very important. And it doesn't, of course, change everything. And I'm just curious, because, of course, as a woman executive in a very male-dominated field, you're dealing with the differences in some ways at every turn. What are the ways, and I wanted to ask the opposite of the usual question, what are the ways in which you feel that being a woman is an advantage, has really given you insights or given you possibilities that wouldn't be open to a man?
Sure. I mean, I think that it's funny. I don't know that anyone's ever asked me that question before, which maybe is a commentary on the gender issue itself. I mean, I think that I often feel as a woman, people are more likely to talk to you. I think that there's something about the nurturing gene, the mother gene, that people will want to talk to you about what issues they have, and potentially confide more in you. And I feel like that ultimately sometimes gives you much better insight in terms of how to better design a product or how to better solve an organizational problem. So I think that there is an element there of just communication and consultation. I think women are more likely to be communicated with and consulted with than men are, and so I think that would certainly overall be an advantage. But I'm sure there are more. But as I said, it's funny that no one's asked me that question before.
While we're talking about the mom factor, my question is, which is harder, dealing with a toddler and baby twins, or with corporate boards?
Well, I will just say, the children and the twins in particular, they're just a complete joy. And I also note that right now they're still infant twins, so last week they both of them rolled over for the first time. So, and that was sort of the moment where it occurred to me that in a few months they might actually be able to go in different directions, which is going to become infinitely more challenging. I might make them more like the corporate board, I don't know. But I think that, overall they're both fascinating studies in dynamics and in interpersonal interactions, and so it's been really fun on all fronts, and there's tons to learn both in the boardroom, and there's tons to learn at home these days.
I notice you have joined us. So.
We did, although you seem to have managed to the questions that are showing up on the moderator are the ones that you've been asking. Particularly that I'm really impressed somehow you do have Wi-Fi in your head, because that question about what are the advantages of being a female leader.
You took my question.
That was right there.
It was amazing, yeah. I mean, it was right here. Marissa, could you talk about advantage and disadvantage as a female leader? And right above it was, as a female CEO, do you get sick of questions about work-life balance? I mean, it was brilliant.
You nailed it.
You nailed it, Terry. Thank you very much. You've ruined the questions. Okay.
Well, I'll do another answer to the question, because I'm not sure my first answer was very good. But I will say, I think that one of the things I noticed is when I got to Yahoo, and I still to this day, I think that leadership is listening. I think that you need to listen to the organization and literally listen to people. So, I'd like to spend a lot of time sitting in the cafeteria just talking to people. And I think it was funny because someone made this comment. They said, well, all the former CEOs, and we've had some women, we've had some men, but they said, they came in, they felt a lot of pressure to have all the answers. And bring the tablets to the solutions for Yahoo just down the mountain to people. And I think that sometimes that's a gender difference. Sometimes men will say, look, I've got to have all the answers. I've got to have it all up front. And I just said, look, I think that, getting Yahoo to the right place, turning Yahoo around is a really hard problem. If there was an easy solution, it would have happened by now. And so it does mean we all have to work together. We have to hear everyone's ideas, everyone's insights into what's working and what isn't, to really come up with the right outcome. But I think that women are more likely to take the view of talking to people, listening to people, being a little more open to the fact that there's a lot of different insights that have to come together to solve hard problems, as opposed to saying, hey, it's definitely all me. I'm going to have to come up with all the answers on my own.
Well said. All right, Joe Fish, I'll let you ask a question.
All right. So this is the top voted question right now. Years ago, when Marissa Mayer was still at Google, an article appeared in the New York Times about the way she tested 41 shades of blue to decide which to use in a navigation bar. Is that true or a myth? And I want to add my own follow-up, which is that as an engineer, it seems very unlikely that you'd test 41 of anything. You don't test 41 things.
Yeah, and I said earlier that I think there were times where I was just too mathematically focused. This would be a good example of it. But let me just at least explain the backdrop. HTML, shades of blue are just math, right? And so what happened was we decided at Google we should have one link color for all the different sites. It turned out that Gmail used a different and greener shade of blue than the search results page did, but it's just math. And so we tried to figure out which one would work better. If you took the greenish blue from Gmail and put it on the search results page, or the blue from the search results page and put it on Gmail, which one would work better? And so, and we ultimately said, oh, well, maybe there's a shade in between. It's just math, it's just hex codes. So we found the mathematical shades in between, queued it all up, ran it, and yes, because the user base at Google is really big, and because we had easy ways of segmenting 40 different groups, we just went ahead and did it. I didn't actually code it, but I did say, look, let's try and break the tie between Gmail blue and Google search blue, and like try and figure out if either shade is right or if there's a shade in between that's better. And apparently that is what the design team did. So yes, I did see the results of that, and we ultimately settled on what we thought was the right shade of blue for that time, place, moment, product. But yes, so it is true. I do think it was overkill. There's sometimes when you ask, yes, you could do that testing, and you might get an interesting result, but should you? Is it really a good use of time and effort? I'm not so sure. But anyway, that's how it came about, and that's why. So it wasn't like we picked 41 different shades. We just ran the spectrum from one blue to the other using hex math.
That's great. So there's a question, actually Gregory Aboud here, not anonymous. 59 people like this one. How much does a company like Yahoo pay attention to a conference like CHI?
Well, we actually have a lot of people here from Yahoo, and I don't know if I want to do a show of hands, but I've heard we have at least 20, 25 people here. We've got a couple folks up here in front, and I think there's some later, but I do think I've heard we have about 24 people here at the conference, and so really excited and happy to have good representation here on Yahoo's behalf.
Okay. All right.
So,
and I would say, I think that we see the ideas that come back from a conference like this, from the papers, from the breakouts and the discussions, come back and, be referenced in the designs that roll out in products for the next, few months or years. And I think that that's really the overall benefit and advantage of a community in a conference like this, is the impact that it ultimately has on the products we design and ship.
mm-hmm.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
So the next question is, what's the future of HCI at Yahoo specifically? That's an obvious question I think is interesting. Are there currently known roadblocks ahead? Are there interesting support structure present that facilitates future growth?
Sure. I think that, for us, our biggest challenge is user engagement. We have a huge user base, one of the three largest in the world. Where Google, Facebook, and Yahoo are the three companies that have said they've seen more than 1 billion users in a month, and we're now north of 1.2 billion users that we see each month. And so we're always looking for how can we grow. Since we see almost all the users who are online every month, how do we have them spend more time with us, do more with us? How can we fill more of their needs? And with each of given that focus on engagement, it's all around how can we design products that are more compelling and capture more of the user's imagination and more of their time. And so, there's a big growth opportunity there for the products, and the focus of that really comes from better design and more compelling products. And so, certainly there's a huge growth opportunity there. And we've worked really hard over the past few years to build up the design practice inside, both by having actual, having a lot of folks who are focused on the practice of design, but also in terms of just getting more of the company enrolled in the design process. So we have a project at Yahoo, or a principle that we call dog food, from that old adage of eat your own dog food. And so with a 9,000 to 10,000 person company, when we have a new product, we try and make sure that everyone inside the company uses it and that they provide feedback, and that ultimately helps make the product better. We also have what we call user experience nights, where we do user labs and user studies down in the cafeterias or in conference rooms. And yes, we have our UX researchers do it, but we also have employees go out and sit down with users and get feedback one-on-one, because I think it ultimately also, you might say, well, it's just a sample size of one, how useful is it? But what I find is it actually makes those employees more open to the feedback that they hear then later from a UX researcher. So you've got a UX researcher that's doing hundreds of studies a quarter, synthesizing the results, bringing them back. But if you even just take an engineer and have them go and do one, It means that they're just that much more likely to actually take that UX researcher's study and say, well, look, I've been in one of those studies. I know what it feels like when a user observes this, or when I see a comment that says that. I understand what it means. I understand how to interpret it and how seriously to take it and actually evolve a feature around it. And so, we're really proud of what we've done with things like, the UX nights and dog fooding to really help support the culture of design inside the company. So other employees are, besides the design practitioners themselves, are there to really support, understand, and help get even more achieved in terms of design.
So a question to both of you is, and this comes from one of the questions here, actually was specific to focus on Terry and his change, that you've changed so much in terms of the research you've done over the years. And in fact, actually, Marissa, you've done the same thing. You've gone from one field to the next. How do you deal with that change, and why do you change?
It's more fun. I think there are two elements. There's the sort of the pull and the push. I mean, the push is when you see that something isn't ripe for further development. I mean, I got out of AI not because there wasn't more to be done, but the direction that I was heading, I was sort of locked into something and I didn't think it was going to work. So there's always the question of when is it time to move on? And then there's the pull, which is something new to learn. That there's, you get stale if you just say, okay, I know this already. And if you can say, here's something which my first real exposure to Kai, I was a keynote speaker. And keynotes, as you know, often are not somebody who's in the field, but somebody who's adjacent to the field. And so in 1990, I was a keynote speaker, and then I said, this really is what I want to do, and got into it. And so I think there's that potential for new things.
So I'm going to tell a story about Terry from the summer that he was on sabbatical. And I don't know if you'll remember this. Once I start telling it, you will, but because it stayed with me forever. And I think about this feature that Terry had like almost every day. Because the idea was, we were looking at ambiguous web searches. Things like Jaguar or April, and we were wondering, wait, how could you have different interpretations, right? Is it Jaguar the animal, Jaguar the car, Jaguar the sports team? Is it April the month, April the person? And we were trying to figure out, should we have a segmented results page? Should we have a columnar results page? We were trying to think through all these different things, and then all of a sudden Terry showed up at one of those weekly UI meetings, and he had a button that just said, do it different. So the idea was, he was like, look, we'll just take a guess and give people results, and if it's not the interpretation they want of a query, you just press the do it different button, and it just goes and does it a different way. And if that doesn't work, you press do it different and does it a different way, and you just keep pressing do it different again, and that do it different is almost a refrain that I hear in my head every day, in terms of you're like, oh, just do it different. And I think that, to the point on change, I couldn't have said it better than Terry did. It is more fun, but I also think about there's that element of just do it different, and having that as sort of the backdrop, that there's real value in doing something differently.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And again and again in different contexts.
It's 9:20 now, so we are out of time. Thank you both very much for coming. It was a great pleasure to have you here. Please join me in thanking Terry.